What's happening, James?
I'm just mellowing out here with you.
Well, we're back in Virginia, my home state.
Your home state.
And you came here in 1980, you said, and I'm just like, I'm so happy to be able to do this with you. After all these years, I've been working with you since what, 2001?
Pretty close to that, yeah. We've known each other a while.
Tell everybody, how did you get started in photography?
Well, I grew up in Southern California, in the San Fernando Valley, and by the time I was like 14 or 15, I just liked photography. I got a Brownie Kodak camera and my mom was really good at flowers in the garden, and I'd photograph them and go to the beach, photograph the girls, etc. And I graduated high school in '65, San Fernando High School, and I went to Pierce College in Woodland Hills, which is in the valley also. Started off with architectural design, but I really had this background, this photography thing. So one day I went to the newspaper for the Pierce College, and they said, yeah, you can start taking pictures for the newspaper. So within 2 weeks, they're publishing my pictures for the weekly, college newspaper. And so also at the same time, I had other friends that liked to publish their own paper, and we had a paper called The Happening. We'd maybe printed a couple of thousand copies, and we'd go down to Sunset Boulevard on the weekends and sell them. People would buy them right on the street there. We had a bunch of friends. We started to hear talk that the hippies, all the young people, were going to riot because they didn't like the West LA police telling them to get off the street by 9 or 10 o'clock. So I knew that on this particular night there was going to be something happening. So got down there, and sure enough, there was thousands of people on Sunset Boulevard. That block, there was no driving. You couldn't drive by around, say, 8 o'clock in the evening. And I was just snapping a few pictures. I had my trusty Rolleiflex 2 1/4 with a big strobe on it. And it just got worse and worse. And finally, I happened to be about a block away where this bus was parked, and it said LA across the top because it was going downtown. And the hippies had taken over the bus, kicked everybody off, and now they were standing on top of the bus, and they had pulled a pedestrian sign out. So yeah, that whole picture right there from about 30 feet away, but I was surrounded by all these people. So I had to hold my Rolleiflex upside down. I didn't have a prism on it, and the flash was connected. So I took it with the camera upside down of the bus and the kids on top, and I just knew I had a good picture. I just knew it.
That's the one that started it all, and don't forget that Stephen Stills was right there as well, and that's where he got the inspiration for What It's Worth.
Exactly. I didn't find that out for years later.
Well, look at that. What a field day for the Heat, 1,000 people in the street. He pretty
there was
much
thousands
described
of
what you
people
just
on
said.
the street.
Yeah, it's great.
But what had happened earlier was in '66, I photographed Don Drysdale for the Los Angeles Dodgers. He and Sandy Koufax were holdouts for '66. So I heard that, hey, Drysdale's on the baseball field practicing at Pierce College. So I went over there and took some pictures, and I just figured, hey, let me call UPI. That might be a hot thing. They said, come on down. They bought that picture from me of Don Drysdale practicing at Pierce College. So that was my first connection with UPI. So then we go a year forward. We're at November of 66, and the riot is happening. I called UPI, and they said, well, we've already got some photographers here with film from just being shot on Sunset. And I said, they don't have what I have. So they said, okay, well, come on down. So I drove down there, and it was about 10:30 at night, and I had like 2 or 3 rolls of black and white film. They processed them, and about 10 minutes later, the guy walked out and he said, I'll buy this one, and this one. $25 each. It was a $75 hit for me. Fantastic. So the next morning, a friend of mine calls me up and he goes, hey, James, I think your picture's on the cover of the Los Angeles Times. And it was big. It wasn't small. And I go, wow, that's true. But what actually happened was because it was United Press International, they're worldwide, that photograph was on the front page of almost every major newspaper in the United States. Front page, because it was big news, Saturday night in LA. But I didn't know that for years later.
One of the things that really piqued my interest with you was your access to the Doors in '67 at Sunset Sound on Sunset Strip, the legendary studio. Still
Right.
there, still family run,
Right.
family owned. I mean, everything in there is like, they've still got a lot of this stuff from back in the day.
Right.
How did you end up there in '67?
Well, what happened was I was a photo editor for the college newspaper, and one day in the darkroom processing some film, I figured, I could probably contact some record companies, and I could get free albums because we'd photograph some groups, we'd interview them, all this new music happening. So the first company that actually contacted me back was Elektra Records, and they said, "You want to meet the Doors?" Yeah, that would be nice. So they said, "We can arrange for you next week to go into the recording studio, Sunset Sound, and you can spend a few hours with the guys." So I said, "Yeah, okay." So it was, I think we got there about 1:30 in the afternoon. I was with a friend of mine who was going to write information down, interview a little bit. And when we pulled up to Sunset Sound, the way it used to be in '67 was they had a little parking lot next to it, the building, and they had a low brick wall. It was about 4 feet high, maybe. And when we pulled up, there's Morrison leaning on the brick wall. When we pulled in, parked, and I just went up and introduced myself to him, and he just looked at me and he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "We're here to photograph you, and where do I go in?" And he just pointed to the door around the corner on Sunset there. He said, "Go on in." Okay. So I went in, introduced myself, got everything set up in there, and Morrison came back in, and between songs and laying tracks down, a lot of time goes by. So I snapped a few pictures. I remember being nervous because I'd never done anything like this before with a camera, and I just wanted to be very quiet. I pushed my film speed to ASA so as I wouldn't have to use a flash because they had a lot of light on there. So I think I set it at 800 ASA, and I was probably shooting at 5.6 at 125. And I started taking pictures here and there, which you see with photographs today. And I just really just...
Well, how long were you there for that
About
session?
5 hours.
You spent 5 hours with the Doors at Sunset Sound?
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, a lot of those key photos are still up in their lobby. I was just there not too long ago, and I've been going there with a friend of mine that's been recording there for a few years, so I go there every chance I get because it's just magic.
Yeah.
But all your stuff is still in there, along with all the gold records. Is the picture of Jim and Rothschild,
Right.
Out on Sunset, and them at the mixing desk in Studio 2,
Yeah.
and all of that. And they celebrate your work there. But that whole Doors thing's very documented there still to this day.
Right. It was just a neat thing that happened that really got my career going a little later.
It's amazing that you were probably the first rock photographer to go in there and
I
document.
wouldn't consider myself a rock photographer at that point. It was early
Well, it
in the career.
established you in that direction.
It did. It sure did.
And then you go from there. We got, right after that in '68, you're shooting the Doors again at Santa Monica Civic.
Right.
Was that when your Weekend Warrior pass came in, you could come up and shoot?
Almost every weekend I could get away and go, and I'm just 140 miles from LA, my parents' house. So
That's great.
every weekend, yeah, just about every weekend.
But I mean, that's a heck of a way to start. You threw yourself in the deep end.
Well, what happened was, United States of America was looking for some men to go to Vietnam, and I knew that even though I was in school, I was probably going to get picked on pretty soon. So in February of '67, I joined the United States Navy Reserves because it was 6-year commitment, but the first year you just went to weekend training, 1 weekend a month, and then active duty after that. So what I did there was I did that, and then a month later in April, where I'm in the Sunset Sound recording studio, and just things started to kind of roll after that. A year later, March of '68, I had to report for active duty. So when you report for active duty, they interview you because they want to figure out where they're going to place you, because you go from Long Beach, California to wherever. So I had put together all these letters of recommendation, one of them for United Press International, Young Photographer Can Do the Job, etc., and a few other things. And then the Pierce College newspaper, I was a photo editor for over a year and all of that stuff. So the gentleman behind the desk said, "I know exactly where I'd going to send you. And I go, where's that, sir? And I'm going to send you to Pacific Fleet Combat Camera Group in San Diego, California. All I really heard was the San Diego, California, not on a boat. So I go, oh yeah, that sounds good. I didn't even remember he said Pacific Fleet Camera Group, and found out pretty quickly that eventually they're going to send you 180 days to Far East Asia, Yokosuka, Japan, and you might go anywhere over there for 180 days. They'll send you all to different places. And we had just lost a photographer in a helicopter crash in Vietnam. So it was all kind of starting to get real, right? Even though the weekends were fun, I could leave base. But, you know, so eventually, though, January of '69, they sent me to Vietnam. What happened was you'd go to Yokosuka, Japan, and report in there. That would be your base of operation. And then they could decide, well, we had a place in Saigon, and we had a place in Seoul, Korea, or these other situations they could send you on. So during my 180 days active duty over there, I spent 2 weeks with the battleship New Jersey, where I'd fly to the Philippines, got aboard that, went out, went up and down the coast of Vietnam firing those 18-inch guns. A couple of times I got off the ship and on a PT boat and shot it from the water. Now all that film that I shot was color 35 millimeter slide film. All of it got sent back to Washington, D.C., and I never saw it again. However, when I was into Vietnam for one of those little trips, I decided to put a little black and white film in the camera, and I kept that and processed it. That's why I still have that today.
Okay, so that's some of the stuff we get to look at and that we're showing as we're speaking right now.
You're right.
It's really cool. But you were back in, that service ended in what?
I was supposed to get out in March of '70, 2-year active duty, 68 to 70, but they started to draw down people. They let me out December the 5th, '69.
So you decided to chill for a little bit before
I
you
took
started.
a year off. I didn't do anything.
So then you pretty much started back around '73, hardcore.
Well, actually, I started back in '71. I was working at a gas station on Van Nuys Boulevard in the Valley, and I got this call. And it was from a photographer I knew that was ready, he's probably in his 40s, and he was doing a lot of stuff. His name was Herb Carlton, but he did a lot of stuff for the Valley News and Green Sheet. He said, James, I just recommended that they hire you full time. Get in touch with them. And sure enough, the next day, I went and interviewed with them, and they said, you're hired. So all of a sudden, I've got a full-time job as a still photographer for the Valley News.
So it's 1973.
It's January of '73. I'm working for Vanguard Photography, who I went to work for about a year earlier. Now, Vanguard Photography was a very big PR advertising photography unit, and there was 5 working photographers. Had big clients like the Dodge Boys of Southern California. We just, big clients. And all of a sudden on the radio, we would listen to a rock and roll station in the darkroom. They started talking about the Rolling Stones wanted to do a Nicaraguan benefit concert at the Forum in 2 days. And it was because at that time Mick Jagger was married to Bianca. She's from Nicaragua. It all made sense, right? So, God, I said to myself, that'd be great if I could photograph that show. Let me think about this for a minute. So earlier, when I was in college, I met a guy by the name of Bob Gibson. And at that time, '73, it was Gibson and Strongberg. They were one of the biggest PR music firms in LA, and he had the Stones. So I called him up and I said, hey, we haven't seen each other in a couple of years. I've been in Vietnam, blah, blah, blah. I said, I want to shoot that concert. What can you do for me? And he said, well, James, it's really a tight thing, but if you could represent somebody. I said, okay, give me about an hour. So then I remembered UPI, and I got a hold of Carlos Shebeck. He was in the office. I said, you got anybody shooting a Stones concert tomorrow night? He said, no. I said, I can do it for you. He says, okay, what do you need? And I said, I just need a letter from you saying that I represent UPI for that show, and I can come down in an hour to your office downtown, pick it up, and get it to the PR people and get a photo pass. So that's what happened. I think Gibson and Strongberg were a little blown away when I walked in their office and gave them the letter. Gibson knew me, but Strongberg didn't. But they gave me the photo pass, so I did that. And Annie Leibovitz was there. There was about 5 photographers, LA Times photographer, maybe 1 or 2 others. And he got us all together before Santana came on, actually, and said, when the Stones come on, you can only shoot the first 2 songs.
Yeah,
So if we get up to that point where the Stones are getting ready to go on, so he reminded us of that again. And so the Stones came on. I think I shot 50, 60 shots of the first 2 songs because I knew that he was going to throw us out. So after the second song, sure enough, he grabbed all the photographers and we're going, behind the stage and going out. I felt a hand on my shoulder and he goes, it was Mr. Stromberg, and he's Gary Stromberg, and he said, James, you're working for UPI tonight? I said, yeah. He said, you go back and shoot the whole show. So I ended up the only photographer for the rest of the show. But I really shot most of those shots in the first 2 songs.
Isn't this really the breaking point for you shooting big bands?
It was. For me, personally, I would say that is the point because I shot mostly color and I got the film in there early the next morning. We used a producer's photo lab in Hollywood. It was a big photo lab for still photography because we didn't do color. We only did black and white at Vanguard. So I put it in early in the morning. By 12 noon, I went down there and picked them up. And I looked at those color slides and I said to myself, oh my God, I actually did this. I mean, I have dozens of beautiful photographs.
Isn't this the beginning of the poster boy time when you were the poster guy? And I think
I was a year away from that.
So, but you started it with that show, right?
Yeah, so what happened was about a year later, there was a place in Encino, California. There was it was kind of like a hippie marketplace, but it was rarely you rented a booth, 10 foot by 10 foot, and you sold your stuff, whatever it was. So I put up some Stones photos in there and they started selling. And then one day a guy came in, I think he might have even bought one of them, and he goes, you ought to get yourself together with One Stop Poster Company. They do rock and roll posters. So I jotted it down. And sure enough, a week later, I took the Stones pictures to Bob Yamasaki at One Stop, and he looked at them. Within 15 minutes, he said, I want that one right there. And he had just done Jimi Hendrix. These are 42 by 58, the big posters. And he had Alice Cooper and he had Jimi Hendrix. And so he said, I want to do that picture as the third one. So we published it. It was just so clear. And I said, but I'm not going to sell you the photographic rights. You're going to have to pay me 7 cents a poster. So that means every time you printed 10,000, I'd get $700. Now, that particular poster was never a big seller. But what happened was later in the year, Elton John was breaking really big in late 74. And I was able to get photo pass at the LA Forum. And that's where I shot those couple of 100 shots of Elton on stage. And he said, going back to the poster company right away, he said, let's do a collage. So we picked, I think it's 13 shots altogether, and made a collage on the 42 by 58.
I remember those posters.
Well, first 5,000 sold within 2 weeks. And then Elton John's lawyers were on to us at the poster company. And so they said, when we got together, they said, well, Elton likes the photographs, but maybe we can do some kind of a deal where you pay Elton some royalties and we'll keep it going. So that's what they did. And it kept going. And the first 5,000 as a test sold out in 3 weeks. Then we came back with 20,000, and they took about 6 weeks to sell 20,000. So all of a sudden, the posters were happening.
These are incredible numbers, and this is why we used to call you the poster guy.
Yeah.
You're going to have to tell the audience at Shot Talk all about Led Zeppelin at the Hyatt House, the famous sessions that Atlantic Records took and adopted and used for their publicity for Zeppelin for years. It's still, to this day, one of our better sellers, those pictures. How the heck did all this happen?
Well, I found out that Salters and Roskin were a big PR firm in Hollywood, and they had a lot of music groups, and I knew that they had Led Zeppelin. So a few months before that happened, I introduced myself to Marcia Hightower. I went down there, showed her some work, and then I didn't hear anything for a couple of months. I get a call from Marcia, and she said, James, you said you wanted to photograph Led Zeppelin? I can make that happen in a couple of days. You want to do it? So I said, well, hell yes, I want to do it. So she said, okay, meet me, it's like during the week, I think like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. She said, meet me at the Hyatt House Hotel. That's what it was called then. We called it the Riot House after that. But
well, that's what everybody called it.
that's when it kind of started. But she said, meet me there and pick up the phone when you get there, and they'll direct you where. I think she gave me some room number, like maybe 703 or whatever, right? So I did that, went up there, and she said, here's the guy. She introduced me to Peter Grant and explained to him that I was their photographer also for the evening through her. And so I said, Peter, my main focus here is I'd like to get a new group photo of the guys. So maybe we can, make that happen. So, they had a bar in the room, so I just had a couple of drinks, and I introduced myself to Jimmy Page and told him what I wanted to do, but he was not quite there, I didn't think. And then I went to Robert Plant and did the same thing with him, and he wasn't quite there. So finally I said, Marcia, I need some help here. I just want to get the guys together. So she said, okay, let's talk to their manager here. So I said, hey, I just want to get them all together for a tight photograph, So he said, is that all the bloody hell you want? He picked up Jimmy Page and he said, where do you want him? And about 4 feet away was a chair, a nice comfortable chair. I said, I want the group in that chair. Led Zeppelin did everything I could tell that Peter Grant wanted them to do. Man, they listened to him, and I could just tell right away.
Yeah, they respected him.
Yes, right, exactly. So he just said, come on, guys. He wants to photograph you in the chair here. I got all of them in the chair, and I had the black and white 35, and I had the color film in the 2 1/4, the Hasselblad or the Rolleiflex, whatever. And so I just started shooting. I got about 8 or 10 black and whites, and I grabbed the color camera, and I got 8 or 10 of those. It only took about 3 or 4 minutes because everything I had ready to go, bang, bang, bang. And I said, gentlemen, we're finished.
But you also got him on the couch.
Yeah, the couch.
Peter with the poster.
Yeah, now, I don't recall if that happened before I set the group shot up, really, or after it, because I spent about 2 hours in a room with them all together. So, yeah, he started showing, somebody gave him that poster, homemade poster, so then and he had him sitting in that couch, and that's those photos there.
What was Iggy Pop doing there?
I never heard of Iggy Pop that evening. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't see him until all of a sudden, what's that guy doing sitting with Robert Plant out in the little balcony area? I didn't know for a year later. Then I found out.
That's funny. Well, that was a pretty rocking spot. You look at the movie Almost Famous, where they did the scenes at the Hyatt, and everything was sort of recreated to have that vibe from back in the day, because Zeppelin was staying there from the early 70s through 75, and then they moved to the Beverly Hilton, because I think the Hyatt was kind of over it at that point.
Right.
Enough TVs out the window and just decadence, but that was the Sunset Strip back in the day when it mattered.
Right. Now I recall that the black and white was always fast because I do it myself at the lab there, and I remember it wasn't but about 2 days when Marcia Hightower called me back and she said, James, I need about 6 copies of this one particular black and white shot. So I did that and gave it to her, and lo and behold, it becomes their next PR picture for Atlantic Records, which...
It's one of the most famous pictures ever of them. The Forum, May 31st, 1973, it's John Bonham's birthday party, and you get the shot of shots.
Well, it was just... he was doing a solo, and I thought it was a good time to take a few exposures of the drummer, because you hardly ever took the drummer, and the drummer was hidden in the back behind the band, and the guys had gotten away from the front of the stage to let him do his solo, and that's when those shots were taken.
Well, it's funny because Jeffrey Mayer, who's also on Rock and Roll Gallery, he's got the color shot, you've got the black and white shot.
He was standing right next to me, but we had never officially met.
But these were like split seconds apart, but it was funny. I get a phone call one day from photographer Neil Preston. He goes, is this shot yours? I'm like, no, this is, he goes, not mine, but somebody that I represent. I said, no, this is James Fortune's. He goes, well, Robert Plant called me. He wants it for John Bonham's statue that they're doing in his hometown of Redditch. And they're going to unveil it for his 70th birthday. And you graciously donated the image. They took your photo and then built scale around it in bronze.
Whoever did it did a beautiful job.
Oh, yeah. you end up going to Kezar, like a stadium in San Francisco,
Yeah.
and you're like on stage, like up on an amp or something.
Well, the stage was built about 12 feet above the ground, and there was a big area behind the stage. And so when they finally announced Zeppelin was coming on stage, then everybody, you had to go up those 12 feet of staircase at the back, get yourself up there. So I waited till everybody was up there and then got up there and just stayed to the side of the stage. If you were looking at the stage, I would have been on the left side most of the time.
Well, the funny thing is, one of the reasons we're here right now is because when I was a kid, I had that famous poster of Robert Plant with the dove.
Yep.
That you took at Kezar. At that angle, there's only two people that managed to get that. Neil Preston got a black and white from the front view. You got that view that had the audience and everything.
Neil Preston was really only about 7 or 8 feet from me. We were sitting on the speakers.
Oh, okay.
That's where we were. And he happened to have black and white film with his camera, and I had color.
Well, the funny thing is, when we got that photo, I remember in 2003, I got a hold of Robert's guy when he was coming through town, Plant, and I said, I've got something for Robert. He goes, I'll come on by the hotel in Beverly Hills, no problem. So I went over there, and remember, you made all those prints. And that's when I gave that. I had a few of them to get signed, one for you, and I remember one for me, in a large one, and I gave one to Robert. He goes, I got to sign these? I said, yeah, but I'm going to give you one so you get to earn it. And he was laughing, and he signed him. He goes, oh, look at my mane, just talking about his hair and everything. He looked great there, with the dove. And then a few years later, we see in Rolling Stone magazine, they said, what's your favorite photograph? And he goes, oh, the one with me and the dove and the sea of people in San Francisco. It's so cool, the life of that.
Right.
One shot. You got a lot of stuff at Kezar. All the big guns were there, but you got the one, the gift that keeps on giving with that poster. Well, thank God you did that, but that really put the whole poster thing on the map, didn't it?
Well, actually, it did, but we didn't publish that poster for a couple of years later.
There was that much of a delay?
Oh yeah, we didn't do the first Zeppelin until '77. For the life of me, I'll never know why we waited so long for the Zeppelin posters. But yeah, the big collage wasn't done till '77, the same year as the Robert Plant dove shot.
So it's 1974. Midnight Special's really starting to catch fire. That was that Burt Sugarman show, if I'm not mistaken. And all the bands that were up and coming were playing. And here's this little band nobody's hardly heard of outside of Boston called Aerosmith. And you're there. Why were you there?
Well, I just heard that they were going to be there, and I had the opportunity to show up and shoot some pictures, which I did. I doubt if I spent 15 minutes there and then just left. But, I actually first saw Aerosmith in '74. They were opening for Edgar Winter, and I knew I was going to be backstage with Edgar and all this, that, and his brother was there, Johnny. So I didn't even, another stupid mistake, I didn't take any pictures of Aerosmith at that show. I wish.
That's all right, but look, when it comes to the Midnight Special, you got the shot of all the things, at least for Rock and Roll Gallery. One of the things that we did was we scored the album cover, or 1/4 of it, of How the West Was Won, the Forum 72. And they used that picture that you did of Jimmy with the double neck. How cool was that Jimmy selected that?
That was crazy.
Out of all those pictures of Jimmy that were submitted, he wanted yours. And that was a big moment for us. But you also did a lot of other things in '73. That Smithsonian book cover, you got the whole band shot.
Yeah.
What other things did you get that were placed from that period of time?
I was doing a lot of shooting of a lot of different things, not just rock and roll. So it's really hard catching me like this to come up with something. But if you're more precise, maybe I can remember.
It's too hard to be that precise because I'm just picturing this body of work.
Sure.
It looks like 1975 was kind of a busy year for you.
Yeah?
You're shooting Zeppelin. You're shooting Paul McCartney at the Beverly Hills Hotel. You're shooting The Who, the Tommy premiere.
And that was the first year I scored the NARM convention.
And tell everybody what the NARM convention is.
Well, NARM convention is the National Association of Recording Merchandisers. So every record company in the world belonged to it. Every major distributor belonged to it. Because they had like over 2,000 people Yeah.
Well, it looks like you had some fun with it because you banked a lot of cool people.
I had a lot of fun doing it. And I was never turned down. You know, a lot of that stuff I did was just I asked to photograph him. It wasn't an assignment. Now, MCA Universal became one of my big clients by 73, late 73. But a lot of that stuff was just, I called a record company up and said, I'd like to have a pass to shoot this show or that show. And that's how it happened. And I always go back to them a couple of days later and show them what I had.
Because you have some very unique pictures of Stevie Nicks.
Somehow somebody told me they were doing a sound check in Hollywood. This is in 76.
that was set-
Oh, and I did get hired by Warner Brothers to photograph. They gave them their first gold album at this restaurant in Hollywood.
So James, it's 1974. You're at the Whisky A Go-Go, Sunset Strip, Iggy Pop. How did you meet Iggy Pop?
Through Danny Sugarman, who was his manager at the time, and he was also Ray Manzarek's manager. And Danny Sugarman, as a young guy, hung out at the recording studio, Sunset Sound, because he just loved Jim Morrison and the Doors. I didn't meet him until late 73, and I got invited to a party at his house at Wonderland Avenue, that famous house. And he
In Laurel Canyon.
Off of Laurel Canyon, right. So I met him there, and then by early 74, I was starting to show up at his house to shoot a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And then he said, okay, Iggy's going to be at the Whisky A Go-Go, July. So he said, I want you to shoot opening night. So I took Michelle, my wife, with me, and there was an ambulance parked in front of Sunset, on Sunset, in front of the Whisky A Go-Go. And, you know, I didn't know anything about it, but my wife said, why is the ambulance there? And I just made up, well, if Iggy gets too crazy, they can carry him out. That's what I told my wife.
Well, you're saying he gets too crazy. You look at the pictures you took where he cut himself up with the glass.
Yeah.
You know, those were famous shots. To Paul McCartney at the Beverly Hills Hotel. What's going on here?
Okay, well, here again, it's Marcia Hightower, and she called me up and she said, Paul's in town because of the Academy Awards. He was up for Live and Let Die soundtrack, so that's why he was there, brought his whole family. And she said, you know, he's at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and on this I think it was a Sunday just before the awards. The awards maybe were Tuesday night. So they said, we want you to meet Lee Salters at the Beverly Hills Hotel swimming pool. Okay, this is April of 75. So I got there. When you get to the Beverly Hills Hotel swimming pool area, you park your car up actually above the pool, and you have to walk down this little path. And there's a lot of plants, and it was a beautiful day, sunny sky. And luckily for me, I was following Lee Salters, and they had a guy from the Los Angeles Times, but they were walking in front of me, and as they were walking in front of me, I loaded up my Rolleiflex 2.25, put the strobe on. I don't know why I did it this way, because normally I didn't do that. I usually would wait till I got there, loaded the cameras, but for some reason I did. Made sure the strobe was on, it was working. I set the camera for f11, 15 feet. I don't know why, but I did. So we got to the swimming pool area, and Lee Salters introduced the fellow from the Times, Los Angeles Times, and then he said, and Paul had just come out of the water, and he had a towel, and he was all soaking wet, and he said, and this is your photographer, James Fortune. And as soon as he said that, Paul just whipped that towel in front of him, and I have the camera ready to go. I didn't even look through the viewfinder. I just went, pow, got it.
Yeah, well, that's the money shot out there, and it's so beautifully dated when you look at the fonts by the diving board. But all the old guys in the suits.
Yeah.
And then there's Paul McCartney in his Speedos hiding with the towel.
Yeah, and then you see the diving board behind it. It says the Beverly Hills Hotel. So it was, and even on the towel, so it was all just set, and we just seemed to hit it off real good. I spent about an hour photographing him, Linda, the kids, in the pool, out of the pool. At one point, I had to pick up his daughter, Stella, because, you know, she said that my feet, it was hot concrete, right? I picked her up and gave her to Linda, and we just hit it off real good. And about an hour later, Lee Salters piped up and said, okay, James, we've got enough, do we? I said, yeah, we're good. And he said, okay, well, thank you very much. Time to leave. And as soon as he said that, Paul looked at me, and he goes, about 10 feet away, he goes, James, I'd like to have you back tomorrow. They'll arrange it. They did. I went back the next day. on the grounds. That's where I photographed them just frolicking around, having a good time. It was just great.
So we're still in 1975, James, with the Who.
MCA Records called me up and they said, we're going to fly a couple of photographers from LA to Houston to do the opening show of The Who in Houston, Texas. Okay, so they got some writers, a couple of photographers. At the concert, the first song came on and, there was like 5 photographers shooting the first song or two. And then all of a sudden, everybody was told to get out of the front of the stage. The manager of The Who decided he didn't want any more photos taken. So we just went back and sat down and watched the show. But we were told there'll be a party afterwards for the group at the top of the hotel. It was a Houston Oaks Hotel in Houston, Texas. It was a big room on top of the hotel. So you could probably handle 200 people up there easily. Well, when we got up there was like a dance floor in the center of the room. Maybe it was 20 by 20 or something like that. And they had a big sign above it, Squeeze Box.
Well, that was the single.
That was the single they were
Who
pushing.
by Numbers.
Right. So the party was going for about an hour. I took a couple of shots of Roger Daltrey and the guys. And I could never get all 4 of them together, so I took individuals with different people. And then, like I say, after about an hour, somebody from the record company came up and said, hey, James, is your camera loaded up? Get it loaded up because we're going to turn this party a little crazy. He said, just keep your eye on the dance floor. So he waited about 5 minutes. He made sure everything was ready. I said, then they put on Squeeze Box, and the 2 or 3 of the girls got out there and took their tops off right away. And then Keith joined them, and he had that Squeeze Box. So they were just having fun, and I was cranking pictures.
So you go from there, then you're at the Tommy premiere. That's a big plate of the Who.
Right. Well, like I said, there was other photographers there, but I went right upstairs with Paul McCartney and Keith Moon, and there wasn't really any other photographers upstairs. Most people were downstairs, including my wife.
So at the Who Tommy premiere, you were just hanging out with Keith Moon and Paul.
Yep, that is correct.
As one does.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of miscellaneous stuff, very cool Hollywood moments from the mid-'70s. One of them that got my eye, Keith Moon, Mickey Dolenz, and what was that, Linda Blair?
Yeah.
In that shot? What was that all about?
Ray Manzarek was there too. This was Keith Moon's birthday party, and so that's why Linda Blair was there, and Linda Lovelace.
Well, you've got pictures of them from just different stuff. It was a different thing. It was Keith Moon, Harry Nilsson, and Ringo, and you said that was at a TV show?
That was at a TV show,
So that was separate to Moon's
That was separate,
birthday.
yeah.
Well, it looks like Moon got around a lot.
He did. He partied. He was a heavy partier.
So
he was a heavy partier, man. I loved to be around him because things just happened when Keith Moon was in front of your camera.